Amarillo said it looked like a great big sand pebble.
Yeah, big rock. That's what I
Yep. Okay. Holtel.
Right, Holtel.
And Charlie, you go by Charlie?
Charles.
Charles.
I thought it was Charlie.
I do. That's the difference between me and my son. He's a Charles, I'm a Charlie.
That's right, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, today is May 14th, 1988.
Yeah, I know it's 1988.
Yep. And my name is Joe Todd, and this is an interview with Mr. Charles Burns and Al Holtel. And we're in Kansas City, and you live in Cushman, Arkansas?
Cushman, Arkansas.
And
Port Orchard, Washington.
Port Orchard, Washington. Okay. Mr. Holtel, where were you born?
I was born in Oldenburg, Indiana,
And when's your birthday?
4 April 1919.
When's your birthday?
April the 21st, 1922.
And where were you born?
Kansas City, Kansas.
Kansas City, Kansas. Why'd you two join the Navy?
I joined the Navy to get off the farm. I didn't want to use that 2 mules for a compass. That's what I tell everybody. But that's why I went in the Navy.
Why'd you join the Navy?
I joined the Navy on account of economic conditions at the time. Jobs were scarce, and the Navy was the place to go. And when I got into the Navy, I thought that was a real good deal.
Why the Navy over the Army or the Marines?
Why the Navy over the Army and Marines?
Mm-hmm.
Because the Army wasn't recruiting at the time, and the Marines had a needed higher capabilities. The Navy at the time had one thing was against it was overbite, because on account of certain times the lungs that they had. That's what they told me over here on Grand Avenue. And but when they recalled me back to go in, why they had overrode those types of liabilities, and they were recruiting at that time.
Why'd you join the Navy over the Army?
Well, we had this little town I lived in Oldenburg, Indiana. They had a man that had been in the Navy, and he was retired. He was retired as the chief gunner's mate. And we talked now and then, and I thought about going in the service, and I'd see these pamphlets, officers' pamphlets, and I says, I want to be one of them officers in the Navy. He said, no, he says, you can't do it. He says, to get in the Navy, to be an officer, you have to get an appointment from your congressman. But he says, best to go in the Navy. He says, I can tell you that, just forget about all the other services, go in the Navy. If you're going to go in any service, go in the Navy. But I did try to get a naval appointment, but there was another kid from a town from where he beat me out. But he also did say you could go in the Navy and as a enlisted man and go to the academy. But that's why I went in the Navy, so I thought maybe I could go to the academy. But after I did get in, I had a chance to go to the academy from the Oklahoma. And I took an exam to the prep school. At that time, the prep school was in Texas. And I wrote out the 9th highest exam, and this officer, I forget who it was, some lieutenant on the Oklahoma, told me that I would go directly to the Naval Academy. And shortly before that, we was on a midshipman cruise, and we worked these midshipmen like a dog. So I said, this is not for me. So I turned it down.
Where did you go to boot camp?
Great Lakes.
I went to boot camp in Norfolk, Virginia.
You went to Great Lakes?
Great Lakes.
Describe boot camp.
Boot camp to me was a novelty. Of course, I was the shortest one in the company, and being the shortest one in the company and with a pair of leggings on, why, it looked awful. Especially the way that we trained in those days. Training was very good. We done a lot of marching. We done a lot of cleaning. We had a lot of inspections, and I slept in a hammock 8 foot off the deck. We had a little poop deck that you got on to get into the hammock, and if you fell off, why, too bad. After completing boot camp, I went into the OG unit, and at that time, we still was sleeping in a hammock, 3 foot off the deck this time. We had a chief that we call Captain Goddamn, because he made us responsible for what we had. At that time, I was signed to the U.S.S. Houston, which was going to the Asiatic Fleet, and she left Pearl too soon to meet her commitment or her assignment, and I was reassigned to the Oklahoma in Puget Sound.
What about basic boot camp?
Boot camp? Well, to me, boot camp was a snap. When I first got to the boot camp, I was assigned as Company 31 in Norfolk, and I was there about a week, and I got a bad cold or flu or something. They sent me to sick bay, and I was there 3 months. 3 days, and when I came back out, they assigned me to Company 32. And Company 32 had this chief they called Cannonball. Probably everybody in the Navy heard about Cannonball. But he was breaking in a new chief that just came on train boots. And we only had Cannonball for 2 weeks, thank God. But anyway, for some reason or another, they made me a right guide. This I'll never forget, and of the company. And we went one day, we're out on the parade ground. We went to parade rest, and I guess I didn't put my arm far enough out this pseudo Cannonball on parade rest. He broke out his saber and went like that, and I thought he was going to hit my finger, so I dropped the gun, and that was bad. So that was my last day of being right guard. But I thought boot camp was a snap to me. I was used to getting up at 4 o'clock on a farm, and when I went in the Navy, I didn't have to get up to 5:30, and I was usually awake and took my shower and was sitting on the deck time the chief came around, the company commander. So at that time, another thing I remember real well, and we had 2 weeks of swimming for people that didn't know how to swim, and I was a good swimmer in them days, so they made me more or less in charge of the swimmers for 2 weeks. So that was like a ball. I'd go out swimming every week. But that was good to me.
When did you go aboard the Oklahoma?
In September 1936, right after when they came back from Europe on a midshipman cruise.
Did you go aboard after boot camp?
Right after boot camp, right.
Did you request the Oklahoma?
No, they assigned me to the Oklahoma. Myself and probably about 50 or 60 other people at the time.
And you went aboard the Houston after boot camp?
Yes, right after boot camp, September of 40.
And then you reassigned to the Oklahoma. When you first saw the Oklahoma, what did you think?
Me, I thought it was I thought it was the biggest boat, but that was a ship I ever seen in my life. When I went aboard, the ship was in dry dock in Portsmouth, Virginia, and we just reported aboard and set down our sea bags and hammocks, and they says, put on your dirtiest uniform you had, you're going over the side, and it was just lowering the dry dock, so we were scraping the barnacles off. That's where I got initiated right fast.
Now you went aboard after the midshipman cruise?
Right after the midshipman cruise.
After picking up all the Spanish refugees and all that?
Okay.
How, in dry dock, what holds that ship up? Oh, do they take the water out? What's it sitting on?
They have they call docking blocks. And they have 3 rows of docking blocks. One of them is right down the keel, and these blocks are, well, approximately 4 to 5 feet in diameter, in the width. And then they have another row of blocks which are portable, which they, for different ships, they're on a railroad track. And they know the curve of all ships that go in dry dock, and they move them in where the outer hull of the ship is going to sit. So you might have one row of docking blocks here, and the other rows, say if the ship like the Oklahoma is 100 and some feet wide, and they moved them in for the curve of the ship. When it went down, they just sat right on top of it.
Okay. And what divisions were you assigned to?
I went to the 5th Division.
Okay.
5th Division.
I went to the 5th Division. That was a unique story to that, going to the 5th Division when I reported aboard. There was about 20 some odd recruits that showed up on deck with me, and they lined us up, and we thought we were all going to the deck division. Mistake number 1. The OD called for a petty officer from the engineering force, and between the two of them, the deck force and the engineering force, why, they went down the line with the chief master at arms, and he felt of our muscles. He said, okay, deck force, the engine room, deck force, the engine room, until he got through all the lines. And he said, okay, all the engine room, step forward, and you go with this petty officer, and all the deck force, why, step over here, we'll reassign you to your division. That's how I ended up in the 5th Division. Of course, at that time, I don't know whether Al had to go over in his undress blues, but that was our uniform of the day, was undress blues for a working uniform. Nobody had dungarees.
That's the way I went over the side. Undress blues.
Later on, they relented and let us wear dungarees, and that was my first supplement to the ship. Of course, when they signed us to the 5th Division, why, I found out that they didn't still have hammocks on there. The Oklahoma City had purchased bunks, and so we had bunks in the 5th Division. And I got a lower bunk. I don't know how I got the lower bunk, because you usually got the higher bunk first. That was my introduction to the 5th Division.
And the 5th Division, was that deck force?
That's the deck force.
Deck force.
But when I reported to the 5th Division, they didn't have bunks, they had hammocks. But
Which is better, a bunk
on
or
a ship, I would say a hammock is better, because when the ship rolls, you're just laying there still. And the ship will just roll, and maybe you roll a little bit, but on a bunk you roll. If the ship rolls too much, you might roll out of the bunk. But shortly after I came aboard, they put bunks on all the division.
We had a strap that we fitted across us to hold us in the bunk. Sort of like a thing that we use on the automobiles.
What was your average day on the Oklahoma?
Well, I probably had was different than most people on the Oklahoma. I was only on there 2 months, and somebody must have liked my work because they put me in the gig, captain's gig. And I spent the next 5.5 years in a captain's gig. I went from seaman second to boatswain first. I wound up the last from 1938 until right before the war in running the captain's gig. But when he was a deckhand, the captain's gig was always normally the cleanest, the best shine boat of any boat on a ship.
And what's the difference between the captain's gig and one of the whale boats? What's the difference?
Well, there's a world of difference. That's like you come into this room and go into some little room. The mess cook is get down here on this hotel, or to some broken down hotel. That's the difference in the captain's gig and the whale boat.
What does the captain's gig have that the other boats don't have?
The captain's, well, one thing, there's a coxswain, an engineer, and 4 deckhands on the captain's gig. They're normally 40 foot long, and when the captain goes ashore, if you take him any place, it's just like you're, say, like the coxswain is the chauffeur in captain's car if he goes ashore. And the captain has a compartment of his own. It's where he sits in when he goes ashore, and that compartment will hold 10 to 12 of his friends or his family, and it's in a compartment all itself. Just like if round this table, it's almost as big as this table where he sat. And normally the captain sat in the rear of the gig, and there were seats around. And then there was an engineer compartment. Now, none of this is out in the open. There's canopies on it. And then you have a bow hold. We had 6 bunks in the gig. And normally the gig crew never went back to the ship after we took the captain ashore. The first 2 years I was on there, we went secured in at night at San Pedro. But we always picked up the captains in Long Beach. That's where they picked them up. Now, well, that was because the coxswain on the gig at that time, he lived in San Pedro, so we took a boat over San Pedro. But then after I took it, we got a berth in the yacht club in Long Beach. And we did that till I got off the boat.
Tell me about Holy Stone on the deck.
Holy Stone on deck? My recollection of Holy Stone was a stick, used to be a mop handle, and a half a brick, and I believe it was 10 licks to a board. I mean, it gets impressed at times. And the petty officer would come around and throw a little sand on the deck, and you would line up in a row on the deck with the teak wood, and then you start in. Do your 10, then you move again. 10, do it again, and then until you finish the whole deck. Then they come in and wash it off and put the Holy Stones away.
How often did you do this?
At least once a week.
Once a week.
Otherwise, there wouldn't be no deck lap.
You have to replace any boards in the deck anytime?
We did on the Oklahoma. We replaced the main decks and the 01 deck on the forecastle in 1938. The decks at that time, they were pine decks, and they replaced them with teak wood. The teak wood's a little bit harder. They left the pine deck on the boat deck, which is the 01 deck.
How many decks on the Oklahoma?
Yeah. 8, I think.
8. And how many
Well,
above main deck?
Well, there was probably, there was till the 03 deck, which was the bridge. There was 04 deck, which was the flying, what they call the flying bridge, but it was not even half as big as this room. I guess there might have been 10 decks.
What do you call at the top of the mast? What do you call that?
Oh, the crow's nest.
Crow's nest?
The crow's nest is, it's almost at the top of the mast, and this is normally where the lookouts stood on the Oklahoma. And this is in the enclosed area. Now it was about half as big as this room. Now they also had the officers up there when they had gunnery practice. This is where they sighted the targets from.
That room, what, about 20 feet square, 30 feet square, something like that?
Yeah, I'd say it was probably about 12 feet wide and maybe 20 feet in width of the ship from starboard to port.
Is that just mainly a lookout?
No, mainly if it was good weather, the lookout just had a little round thing. He stood up on the mast, and he looked round. But if it rained, you could go out of there and go up to the they called it what they call that on the Oklahoma.
Where did we stand the smoke watch?
You stood the smoke watch back aft on the mainmast. But they had one of them. They had one of them back there too.
Yeah.
The same room back on the mainmast.
Now, what's smoke watch?
Well, if the smokestacks were smoking black, well, you had to let the engine room know, or let the OD know. And he would call the engine room and have them change the smoke. The reason for that, I imagine, was on account of
Detection.
never, yeah, about that too.
Well, it's supposedly, they told me it was a detection of the enemy. Now, if you go out to sea and the ship starts smoking, you can see it further over the horizon, and they can see the ship.
Did you cross the equator in the Oklahoma?
I never did.
No, I didn't get not on the Oklahoma. I crossed it many times, but not on the Oklahoma.
What cruises did you all make on the Oklahoma? What maneuvers or what cruises?
The only ones I recollect is going to Honolulu and at the ship's maneuvers in Honolulu, and I was in Long Beach one time, and the West Coast in San Francisco, and up to Puget Sound, and that's about it as far as cruises were concerned.
Bet you.
Well, we've made, well, quite a few trips to Honolulu. Once a year, we'd make what they call the whole fleet would go, and then would probably go out as far as Midway and then turn around. This was just practice, fire guns and maneuvers with the whole fleet. Then we'd go in Honolulu for a week of recreation and come back to state. But I also made 2 midshipman cruises on the Oklahoma. No, let's say I made 3. 2 of them were to Honolulu, and one was to Vancouver, Washington. I mean, Canada, BC.
Is that during the Wolves of the?
No,
not
the
World's
one.
Fair, but,
No, in BC, when we went to BC was in 1939.
is that the big there's some celebration up there?
Yeah, they had a celebration up there too. That was in 39. I forget the centennial or something. They had some celebration. But we did take the midshipmen. That was right when shortly before they declared emergency in Europe when Hitler was
September 39.
September 39. I think it was somewhere in that area.
Were you on board when the shaft broke?
Yes, I was on board.
Why'd that shaft break? What caused it?
I don't think anybody knew why the shaft broke. It was probably just fatigue, unless they were trying to go too fast. But I do remember when the shaft did break and how we secured the shaft. I was sort of a diver a little bit. Them days they didn't have very divers, but they had a steel helmet and they had a big square pump where people went up and down on the pump. They put you down, and we secured cable to the screw so the shaft wouldn't fly all the way out. But then you'd go down, you'd be down there maybe 5 minutes, and you'd take one turn, you'd come up and tell the next guy what turn you took so he could take another turn around another blade in the screw. And we secured these to the bits up on the top side.
What size cable did you use?
I guess they were about 1.25 inch cable. That was not that big around.
So
steel cable.
So you tied the propeller down to the shaft so it wouldn't.
Well, see what we did. See, it's got propellers on it. We would wrap maybe 2 turns around one shaft, and then go take this cable and wrap it around another shaft. Another blade on a propeller, and go around it. We brought the cable, one up on the port side, one on the starboard side, and tied them to the bits of them. So the shaft was, a shaft came out of the, it was still set in the keel place, but it broke loose. There was about, if I remember right, there was about a 3-foot space in it, and it hadn't went all the way out. But until we went back in the yard, it was still sitting there. It didn't bother us after that.
How big is that shaft? What's the diameter?
I would say approximately 12, 14 inches in diameter.
And how big's the propeller?
Oh, hell.
We only had one screw, so it's probably, I'd say it's about half the size of this room here. Just imagine it with the blades on it.
You only had
Because
one
of the big
screw?
screw.
We had 2 screws.
We have 2 screws?
Sure, we had 2
See,
screws.
you broke the shaft. How would you move?
News to me. Anyway, we had
2 screws.
That was
Where? Oh, I'm sorry. Where did the shaft break?
It broke shortly, a little bit before it came out of the hull, back by the shaft, well, they call it the shaft alley. It broke in there. That was, I don't know, we couldn't say exactly where it broke, but that was the shaft. When they pulled it out, there was, I'd say, 25, 30 foot of shaft when they pulled it out when it was in dry dock.
And how long was that whole shaft?
Maybe 60 feet, I'd say.
So
Roughly.
it broke almost in half.
Yeah, it extended quite a ways because of the bearings it had to go through.
What kind of bearings that thing had?
Ligmavitis.
Hmm?
Ligmavitis is a form of wood that they use, put around the shaft.
They had wooden bearings?
Yeah, wood bearings. Ligmavitis. You'd have to look it up in the dictionary.
Yeah. And were you on board when he sank the freight train?
Yes, I
Yes.
was. I was on board when they sank the
Tell
train.
me about that.
You want me to tell them?
Either one? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going back to tell you a story about the
Oh, yeah, okay.
about the shaft.
Tell me about the shaft.
In the meantime, when they was working on the screw to get it tied down, we were trying to get a line throwing gun to get a line over to the next battleship. And after about 4 or 5 tries, of which we were very short, by the boatswain puts it up on his arm and says, "Shoot!" And all I could hear was old man Foy up on the bridge, Captain Foy. He said, "Relieve that guy. Send him to his room. I don't want him." So, that was one of the unique things about.
Now, what did he do?
Well, he took the line that they used to shoot across, but you shoot a small line first with a weight on it, and then you have a bigger line on a coil that goes out, so that when they get the smaller line, well, they heave in the smaller line, and then you get the bigger line to go with it for towing. And he had the intermediate line around his arm. He thought with the elevation, why he would make it. That was the highlight, I think, of being towed by another battle wagon.
You
Of course,
find
it shamed us, see, because they had no desire to be towed by somebody else.
who was towing you?
Who was our tow?
I
I don't remember. I thought it was the Maryland, but I'm not quite positive.
The freight train.
Hmm?
The freight train.
Freight train.
Yeah.
Oh, the freight train. Oh, that was very unique. I was up on deck at that time there, and I hated to move those plowed steel cables that you were talking about, because everything was up behind. We done it by the whistle or by the boatswain pipe, and there was very few, except a few hand signals that we used as far as deck force concerned. Mostly was by boatswain pipe. And when you turned a ship or done anything with it, you had to use those heavy steel plowed cables, and it took almost the entire division to do the job. And they'd call all hands upon deck. Well, it was always slackers, because they hated that too. And at that time, we were moving out for sea runs or for a test run, and it was in a heavy fog. And the fog was laying right down on the doggone deck. And evidently, this tug with 3 barges that I remember were coming across our bow. And neither one of us slowed down. The tug, he laid on the coal and moved out, and I imagine he cut the barges loose. I really don't know, except for the accounts that was in the paper afterwards. Luckily, when we did sink the barges or the boxcars, they were loaded with material that floated. And when the boxcars went into the water, why, you could see them floating around out there, and the tug was almost to Port Orchard.
Yeah.
That was it.
I don't remember. The only thing I know it hit, went through our blister ledge. broke that, but we went back in the yard and had to have that fixed. But the only thing I could remember, how these freight trains were floating out there in the water. I thought, well, I didn't see it hit, but I was, at the time we had the gig was in the skids, and I was sitting in the gig, and I heard this thud, and I was wondering what was going on.
What did that feel like?
Well, it was just as, well, it was where I was, it was just a thud.
Did you see the?
Yes, I was on deck because we were handling the cable at the time.
Now, what exactly, when you handle a cable, what do you do?
Well, it's according to what it's used for, whether it's used for coming off the dock or turnless route. We were turning around. I think it was coming about from the dock at that time from Pier 1.
Well, how do you turn the ship with the cable?
Well, you were taking the cables in after we
Taking
left the
cables,
dock. They were
right.
still faking the cables down on deck.
Oh, they're wrapping them around the bits or whatever?
Yeah, well, see, when you tie up the ship, you put cables out in lines, manila lines, and there's usually have a cable on the bow and some on the stern, and you have men that after they leave the dock, you fake cables down on deck before you put them on a reel to stow them down, and they're pretty heavy, and sometimes it takes 10, 12, 15 men to pull them things in, especially on a battleship when you have them heavy cables.
And were you using the foghorn or whatever?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, they
All
were
kinds of
using.
drones,
Oh yeah, they were
How
using.
come the
foghorn.
bars didn't heed the warning or whatever? Or does anyone
Well,
know?
all I know is this: when they have a straits, I think they call it. I forget what strait they have, but the water in that it's narrow, it's shortly after you leave the Navy Yard in Bremerton, and sometimes the current runs in there 6-7 knots, and you have to go through there pretty fast. If you're going out when the tide is coming in, well, you've got to kick them old engines up pretty hard when you go in there.
They call it Centaur Inlet.
Yeah.
Did you see the bars before you hit it?
No, I didn't. I seen the tug.
You saw the tug.
I saw the tug, but I didn't see the barges.
How close were you to the tug?
Oh, I imagine it was at least 100 yards when I seen it.
And what it feel like, or what'd you hear when you hit
Same
it?
as these, it's just a slight nudge. Because we didn't think anything had happened. I mean, after all, a big battle wagon like that, we hit anything, but it usually moved.
So, what happened to the boxcars bucking out? And
Well,
did you
somebody
see-
I think there was tugs picked them up.
Any of them sink?
Well, there's a frantic effort to get us back to the dock, let's put it that way. Because when you move the ship into Sinclair Inlet, with the tide running like it was, and the fog and everything, you were in deep trouble.
And we just turned around and went back to the dock.
That's
So,
right.
what was the result of that incident? Anything?
As far as I know, well, there was, like you said, there was big pieces in a Bremerton paper, but I don't
Big
know.
headlines.
But I don't think anybody on the ship got any reprimand, not that I know of.
What did the headline say?
Battleship runs over freight train.
That was a big headline. Battleship runs over the freight lane.
It was well, that was quite of a neat joke around town for quite a while, you know. But,
There's some guy here that was on the bridge when that happened.
I was.
Do you know who?
It'd have to be a sickleman or quartermaster.
Yeah, but
Or
I
an
heard him
officer.
talking about it, and I wanted to interview him about that, because he saw the barge and he turned and said he ran. So I got to find out who that is so I can interview him about that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could probably ask around and find out who it was. I don't know if there's anybody here that was on the bridge at that
Yeah, I was in 3 or 4 men, and one guy said, "Yeah, I was on the bridge and I saw that barge and freight train," and I said, "I turned and I ran." Okay, going on Liberty. What'd you do?
What I did, I was a clean sailor. I went to movies, seen the sights, took in dances on a pike, and girls.
we were all clean sailors. I mean, after all, we never went over on the pike. We never went to all these
Don't
here
tell
beer
me you went
joints
to the
as we're
Majestic.
portrayed to go. I never run up a barbell. Let's put it that way.
What's the Majestic?
That was a diamond dance hall on the pike. That's where I thought everybody went to.
Well, I did buy one of those watches on the pike. I mean, what was it, $1 down and $1 a month or something like that.
What is pike?
Well, it was in Long Beach. It was the very lowest street next to the beach. It was right on the beach, actually. But I don't think that at that time they didn't even leave cars down there. There was no cars. It was just like you go to a shopping center. They had bars and stores,
Roller coaster,
and dance hall. It was probably about 5 blocks long or 6 blocks long.
Well, you can imagine a carnival type, same thing, you know, you could throw darts, you could run race cars, or just like you was at a regular carnival.
Of all the ports that you made, I guess Long Beach, San Francisco, Seattle, Honolulu, what was your favorite port for Liberty?
Mine was San Francisco.
Why was it better than the other places?
Well, I don't know. I just there was just more to do in San Francisco, more to see.
Well, the people in San Francisco were more friendlier. If you got loaded, you could sit on the curb and they'd send for the shore patrol, and the shore patrol never turned you in. They always took you back to where you were going, which is one thing. We never got knocked off there. I mean, robbed. It was a very wide open city for us. At times we could wear our, I won't say it, our blue denim dungarees. We had another name for them at that time.
What is it?
Our jiggy dungaroos.
Well,
We're not allowed to say those
I
things.
never did wear them.
Jiggy. What's the term jiggy mean?
That's when you go out and pick up these gals, I guess.
They had bell bottoms on them and different things, and we at the time that we were in there with the screw off, that's where I met my wife, because I'd been writing to his wife, the sister, see, and come to find out she didn't want a sailor, she wanted a Marine thing, so I met my wife. And at that time, and Brisbane was right close by, so and they had just come down from Montana. And the town treated us very good. I mean, it actually did. We rented a car. Of course, I couldn't rent a car. Kenny rented a car. And we went all over San Francisco that way. And we could go in any bar. We even danced in bars that had no dancing signs. And we actually thought that San Francisco was about one of the greatest sports that we'd ever run into.
Ever go to Captain's Mast?
No, I never did on the Oklahoma. I've seen the captain every day.
That
I
was
thought I was going to get put on report one time. I'll tell you about that later.
I never made Captain's Mast, but almost. You got to remember that you was working for our gold stripes.
What's a gold stripe?
Gold stripe is good conduct.
But about being put on captain's mast, it was the captain and that kept me from getting on report. So that worked that way, backwards the way it normally works to me.
Is that Foy?
At the time it was Foy.
What kind of man is he?
Foy was the best. Well, let's put it this way. I was in the boat with 5 different captains. And he was a wonderful man, a wonderful person. He even took me home, and his wife cooked me home-cooked meals, invited me to the beach in Honolulu and for beach parties. Of course, he was a personal man to me. He was just like, to me at that time, he was like a father to me.
What kind of personality did he have?
I don't think he ever as far as I know, I don't think he ever got too perturbed or too mad. He was always friendly. I think he was friendly to the enlisted men as well as the officers. But I think he was stern. Probably more stern than to the officers than he was to the enlisted men.
Did you know Captain Ford?
I knew him from the 5th Division was the captain's deck. It was right outside his cabin, so we had to keep that extra clean. And the captain, as I knew him, of course, at this time that he's talking about, I'm trying to come from second and second to make 3rd class. And when you're trying to work yourself up through those the ranks there, why there's a lot of little things that come and go, and you don't necessarily meet the captain all the time, except when you're sweeping up in front and swabbing his deck and keeping it holy stone for him. Right? Was my biggest meet with Captain Foy. Although unlike Al, I felt that Captain Foy was very fair because he was always friendly, and that made the men more loyal to him than other captains that we had. I hadn't previously run into any, but being as this was my first time.
He wasn't on the ship December 7th, was he?
No, he was relieved by Captain Bodie.
Was
I
he
think-
relieved of his duties? Or?
Who, Captain Foy?
Yeah.
Oh yes, he
Oh,
was.
yeah.
He was relieved about. I forget. It was probably a month or 6 weeks before.
Why was he relieved? What?
Well, it was his time to get relieved. See, the captain stays on a ship, a year. In them days, I think it was about a year, or maybe a little less, and they'd get transferred to another duty station. That's why he was relieved.
What about Captain Bodie? What kind of man was he?
Well, when I left the gig, I requested Captain Foy to let me get out of the gig. And in them days, like in my case, if you did a good job for the captain in a boat, he recommends you to the next captain. And I knew this from the previous captains. That's why I stayed in the boat. Some captains like to get a new boat coxswain. But I told Captain Foy that, well, I was first class boatswain at the time, and I'd been first class for a little over a year. And I told the captain that I did not want to run for Captain Bodie. I wanted to get some experience on deck. But that wasn't my prime reason. My prime reason, I'd heard Captain Bodie was sort of an eccentric when he was out in China Station. Well, they called him Flower Pot Bodie.
Flower Pot Bodie.
Flower Pot Bodie.
Why'd they call it Flower Pot Bodie?
Well, I guess out in China he'd bring flowers. I think he was on a ship out there, the Black Hawk or something. I don't know. And he would have flower pots sitting all around deck, and he'd make people water the flowers and stuff like that. I thought maybe he'd have them sitting down at a gig.
Were you on board when the Macon went down?
No.
The dirigible?
No.
Oh, what were the other captains that you served under?
Well, the first one was Hall, and then there was Hall, and there was Lofquist, and there was Hartigan, and Foy, and Bodie.
What were the other captains like besides Ford?
Well, I think all the skippers we had on there were good men. I mean, they were fair. Lofquist was, to me, he was the most stern. Of course, the only thing on Lofquist, when he reported aboard, he wanted to see me up in his cabin. I went to see him in the cabin, and he told me what he wanted, and I said, well, we do all of them things, every day. And at that time when I reported to him, I was wearing black serge with bell bottoms. It wasn't a regulation uniform. He looked me up and down. And he says, Holtel, you got a nice, sharp-looking uniform, but I don't want you to wear it. I says, Captain, in the gig, to look sharp, you have to use this kind of uniform, otherwise it looks ratty, because you use a lot of lint, shine in the boat. You always got to keep the boat shine, clean, rags. You get the lint on the regulation uniform, it's hard to get out. So he says, no, Holtel, he says, when you take me ashore tomorrow, I want you to be in regulation blues. Well, I wasn't. Nor was the whole crew. Well, we went through quite an expense to buy these uniforms. The uniforms in them days, black serge, cost $27 a pair, but this was back in 37, 38, and that was a lot of money. That was more money than some of the men worked. Took them a month to buy a uniform. So he got out on a dock and he says, Holtel, he says, I thought I told you to be in regulation blues. I told him, I says, Captain, I just wanted to see how everybody looked in black serge. He says, they look fine, they look sharp. Tomorrow morning when you pick me up, they better be in regulation blues. So we went in regulation blues. We wore them a few days and they started looking ratty. More or less on purpose. We didn't brush them off too good, as good as we could have. But a few days later, he says, Holtel, he says, you better go back to them black serge. He'd see the other captain's gigs, boat crews, as they was picking up the captain. He says, you better go back to them black serge. That was the only confrontation I had with Captain Walker's.
I heard people have said the Oklahoma was a loose ship.
I don't think it was, well, it was kind of loose, but it wasn't, I think there were some other ones that was...
They said it wasn't as regulated as
not
some
as
of the other
regulation
ships.
as some of the other ships.
Could you have tailored uniforms in the Navy?
No. Oh, if we could? No, we didn't have, that was... Well, we had them. They didn't tailor them, though. You had to go to the tailor shop, I mean, on the beach. And like the black serge I wore, they were tailored.
But you could... Were they authorized or regulation or?
No, they were not authorized. But some people would wear them. They have a locker on the beach, and then they change over to.
And the 13-button uniform. Now, what uniform is that?
Well, they had all the uniform. All the blues were 13 buttons. Undress and the dress boots are all in 13 buttons. They flap in the front.
Where was your station during general quarters?
Mine, when I first went aboard there, I was the first shellman on a 551 on broadside gun 551.
At the 5-inch?
Broadside gun. It was 5-inch 51 broadside.
Well, no, what's 5-inch 51 was?
Well, it's a deck gun is what it actually is.
It's a deck gun. It's a, well, it's a, actually.
Barrel length,
barrel
size of
length,
shell.
and the size of the shell was approximately, it was 5 inches in diameter.
Oh, okay.
The shell was about that long, and they had a can of powder behind it. I was the shellman who threw the shell in, then the guy threw powder in, and then they closed the breech. We only did that 1 year, the first year I was on there. They usually, to be the first shellman was kind of a hard job. You know, it took a little bit of muscle to sling that shell in there. And them days I was about the same as I am now, same weight, 195 pounds, 192. And then the next year, I was still a seaman, and they put me as the gun captain, but I've stayed gun captain of that gun until 1941.
Gun captain of what gun? The 5-inch?
5-inch, number 3 5-inch gun. And I put a E and 3 hash marks on number 3 gun.
How do you get an E?
You have to get so many hits in so many seconds, and you have 4, the first, they fire 4 rounds, and then they change crews, then they fire 4 rounds. In them days on a 551, you had to, in order to get an E, you had to put them 4 shots in a target, which is out a few miles, and the closer you got it to the target, the more points you got. But you had to fire them 4 shots in 16 seconds. And then you changed pointers and trainers, and you fired 4 more shots. And if you got, well, if I remember right, it was, you had to get at least 7 hits out of 8 to get an E. And if you got them 7 hits out of 8, they had to be in the bullseye or close to the bullseye.
How big's that target?
The target was probably 30 foot long and maybe 10 foot tall. And the bullseye was 6 foot in diameter. It's a black bullseye, about 6 foot long.
Now, number 3 gun is port or starboard side?
Starboard side.
Starboard side.
Odd numbers on the starboard side, even numbers on the port side.
Where was your station here?
I was started out as a pointer on one of the broadside guns. I don't forget which gun it was either 3 or 4. And as I say, I fired pointer on one gun and gun captain on the other, because at the time that kind of brings it to mind when Al was talking about it, about changing crews, because I remember firing gun captain on one side and pointer on the other side, because we changed guns to duplicate the feed on it.
Now
With the same progress.
What does the gun captain do? What are his duties?
Well, the gun captain, he was the overseer of that gun. Plus, when they said commence fire, see the breech is closed. You pull the breech open, and the trayman puts a tray in. Then the shell goes in. Then the powder goes in. And the gun captain slams it shut, and he says, "Commence firing." And then they pull the trigger.
Now, who actually fires the gun?
The pointer. He actually fires the gun.
So when you were the pointer, you actually fired the gun.
Actually fired the gun. Yeah, you pull the trigger.
So what kind of trigger does it have?
Just like a shotgun.
Just like a shotgun. No difference. As I say, the gun captain carried out all those instructions there, including putting the primer into the breech. After everything went in, yell fire. The instructions are coming down from the directors, and when they said go into local control, the gun captain had complete control of his battery, and that's the way they operated.
And where was your station during the Battleship?
I was in the live rafts at starboard side of frame, approximate frame 60, right underneath the crane.
And where was yours?
Same station on the same side.
I was going to ask, what did Captain Foy do to keep you off the port?
Well, this ties in 2 stories. When you asked the story on here, what was the amusing story? Well, I had this engineer. His name was Fred Mackey, and he was first class engineer. And like I say, we used to take food from the ship and have it in a boat, and then we'd cook our own meals in the boat. And we never, very seldom came back to the ship for food to eat. So they gave us food, and this was a slip signed by one captain to another that we could do this. So we'd go down to the commissary and get food or different things what we wanted to eat. And this was, if I remember right, it was fairly close to Thanksgiving, and instead of giving us a cut up turkey, they give us the whole turkey. And the boat boom is just like a log tree hanging out from the ship, and we tied up on a line, and the gig always was on the other. There's 2 boats tie up to one boat boom. Then there's a ladder, just a rope ladder that goes down. Well, he was going down the rope ladder, and it was kind of windy, and he was pulling up on the line to get the boat right underneath him, and by the time he thought he was going to go get on the bow of the gig, and the bow wasn't there, he fell right in the water. Well, he had this turkey in a paper bag, so he didn't want to get this turkey wet. He was there in the water, and all you could see was his arm and the turkey. He was holding this turkey out. Well, we got him fished out of the water and went alongside the gangway to pick up the captain and take him ashore. And the OD at the time was Lieutenant Stallings. And he called, he says, "Hotel, I want to see you up on top here. I want to talk to you." He got me up there, and he says, "Well, you can consider yourself on report." I asked him, "What did I do wrong?" He says, "You're stealing food." I said, "We're not stealing food." He says, "I seen that man of yours down there with that turkey, All I could see was his arm and a turkey, and that definitely was a turkey. And he asked me what we were going to do with it, and I told him we were going to eat it. Well, at that time, Lieutenant Stalling, he was just reported aboard. He hadn't been aboard too long, maybe a few days or a week. Anyway, about this time, the captain was coming down from his cabin. He'd come down in. He couldn't. He was going to write out a report slip right then. He said he had his best to get this report slip. They already had it. And but that was sort of unusual for the OD to be talking to me when the captain come up. He asked. He says, "Lieutenant," he says, "what's my gig coxswain doing up here? He should be down in the boat." He says, "Oh, I had a little small conversation with him. I'll take care of him. I want to see him tomorrow morning." He said, "I'll see you tomorrow morning." So the captain says, "What do you want to see him tomorrow morning for?" Well, Lieutenant Stalling blustered around a little bit. He says, "I'm going to put him on a report, preparing food." The captain told Lieutenant Stalling, he says, "You forget that. He's got my permission to carry food off of here. Matter of fact, I got a signed statement that he has that he can take his own food aboard." But when Stalling was left the ship, I don't know if he left the ship before December the 7th or in. I didn't see Lieutenant Stalling. I called him Lieutenant. I used to call him Red too. Not to his face, but I used to call him. He had real fire red hair. And I didn't see him until we were in Orlando, and some guy says, "Well, there's some old gray-haired guy looking for you. He's looking for you for 2 days." And finally, at the dinner, he come in this dining hall where we're having dinner, and he says, where in the hell's this guy Holtel anyway? He says, "I was looking for him for 2 days." And went up to see him right away. I knew him just like that. He looked the same. He was still slim and tall, but he didn't have red hair. He had white hair. And the first thing I do, I says, "Lieutenant," I says, "you lost your red hair." Then the next thing he asked me, he says, "You got that turkey cooked yet?" But this was the funniest thing to say. It went over the years.
Is he still around?
Yes, he lives in Florida.
Okay, we talked about the train. December 6th, Saturday. What were y'all doing?
That was the day before. I was on shore patrol, I was on shore patrol the night before in Honolulu.
I was partying.
Did you notice anything different out of the ordinary Saturday night?
I didn't notice anything different. I was senior shore patrol on Holtel Street. That was the main drag at that time in Honolulu. From there to River Street and back. But I didn't see anything in that out of the usual.
Now, what do you do on shore patrol?
Well, if somebody gets in trouble, you try to either try to make less trouble or get them away from where they were, or if they insist on having trouble, you take them back to shore patrol headquarters. And if people still try to insist on making trouble, put them on a report. Sometimes we'll just send them back to the ship. Put them in a cab and send them back to the ship.
So, you were partying?
Yes, it didn't last long because I had to be back at the ship in time to take the captain to church call. And so the partying was usually cut short.
And what church call?
Well, that's when usually early on Sunday morning you have a gig ready and you take him to the officers' landing so that he can go to church. Whether he goes to church or not, I don't know.
He went in the gig after I left.
So the captain didn't go to services on the ship then?
No.
Hi.
No. Give us just a few minutes.
Few minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me know then.
Okay.
Thanks.
So what time did y'all get back to the ship?
Well, I got back to the ship about 9:30. I caught the 9:30 boat back from the landing, and I was with my two brother-in-laws at that time. They worked in the ship service. Their names were Palmer boys. And they worked in ship service, and of course they had all the money. Even though I'd made third class, well, I still didn't have as much money as they had. So I usually went partying with them, which didn't consist of too much. It was just making rounds in the bars and the skating rink and a few other things, and then we all came back to the ship.
Where were you partying that night?
Oh, we usually made the Black Cat, which was one of the standard ones, and then from there we progressed out to Waikiki Beach, which is on the way is the skating rink. I don't even remember whether it's there or not. I didn't see it the last time I was out there. And from there we'd go on out to Waikiki Beach, and they had a merry-go-round out there that you could get on and drink beer. We usually didn't go into the big hotels because they didn't particularly care for sailors to patronize the larger hotels out on the beach.
Why?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know. Whether it's on account of the uniform or whether we was too rowdy or what, but they just as soon as we didn't come in. Although Waikiki Beach was very well open, and we utilized that quite a bit, surfboarding and whatnot. But that was quite an evening out if you could get all the way out to Waikiki Beach and back.
So what time did you get back to the ship?
I didn't get back to ship about 3 o'clock in the morning. Usually Liberty, I think at that time, was up at 1 o'clock in the morning. And you make your last rounds after 1 o'clock, and then you go back to Shore Patrol headquarters. If you have any reports to make out, you sign the reports, make out the reports, sign the reports, then they give you a car to go back to ship. I guess I got back to ship about 3 o'clock, 2:30, 3 o'clock.
So tell me exactly what happened December 7th.
Well, for my story, it'll be quite a while.
That's fine.
Okay. Well, if you had Shore Patrol, you could sleep in till 7 o'clock. So I got up about 7, and there was a friend of mine by the name of Smokey Struthers, who was another first-class boatswain mate, and he's an old-timer. Well, he was an old-timer as far as I was concerned. He wore 4 hash marks. He had 16, 17 years in the Navy. And we played cards. And this card game, I forget what the name of the card was, but it had 15 points, and he owed me $12 from other card games before, so he wanted to get even. So I was playing cards with him across the bunk, middle bunk. He was on one side and I was on the other. All I had was a towel around my neck and my skivvies on. He was playing cards. And I won 2 more games. So he was into me, I was into him for $15. So we started the 3rd game, and we heard a thud. And old Smokey remarked, he says, "Well, hell, that damn 4th Division must have dropped that boat they got back aft on the deck." And then I was shuffling the cards, and here they passed the word, "We're under attack." And he said, whoever passed it, he says, "This is no shit. And all hands man your battle stations." So Smokey went one way, I went my way, and I went up to the gun. Up to gun 2, I was gun captain gun 2. I left gun 3 against my wishes. I was too junior or first class, and boatswain mate French took over the division about that time. He took over gun 3. He was going to get the gold hash mark. The gold E. But anyway, I went to gun 2, mustered my crew, and then they passed a word. This was just a minute or so later. They passed a word for all unengaged personnel to seek cover. And if you wasn't on an anti-aircraft gun, you were to go below the 3rd deck. Well, my whole crew left, and I dogged down the hatch in the casemate, And I said, well, I'm not gonna go down below the third deck. I'm gonna see what the hell's going on. So I looked out the gun port, was laying out the gun port, halfway between the Navy Yard, or I should say, well, I'd say the officers' club landing. There was these 3 planes, and they were flying sort of in formation, but they were flying one a little bit behind the other. And I looked at them, they had them damn torpedoes hanging down on them. And about this time, they dropped the torpedoes. One guy dropped the torpedo, another guy dropped the torpedo, and the third one dropped the torpedo. They landed in the water. And it mesmerized me, and when they dropped the torpedoes, they went up. I seen these big red balls on the plane. Right away, I knew they were Japanese. And them torpedoes, I just followed the torpedoes right into the ship. It was right below me. The first one hit right below me. The next one was a little bit further aft. Next one a little bit further aft. And well, it was a big explosion. All I seen then was mud and water flying in the air. About this time, when the water subsided and the oil, mud, and it was muddy water with oil, the ship, when it first hit, the ship sort of went listed from port to starboard, but then it started to list to port. Well, I jumped out of the gun port, crawled to the starboard side of the deck was slick, you know. Matter of fact, I had to get a hold onto the bar bit of the turret so I wouldn't slide back down on the deck. Got to the starboard side, and the deck, then I would say when I got over there, the ship was listed maybe 20 degrees to port. And I was half walking on a crack between the deck and the bulkhead, the wall. And I got to number 3 casemate on the starboard side, and I looked in there, and there was a lot of men jumping out of we had a hatch, and we had an escape hatch on the top, and they was coming out of that escape hatch. So I hollered for everybody they was going to escape hatch and right over the side. So I said, let's open up the hatch so more people that can get out. Nobody paid any attention. So I got in there, and I used the dog wrench to open the dogs up. And I told him, when I got them loose, you open with the hand. He opened them with the hand. We pulled the hatch out, and it was, as far as I'd say, there's hundreds of men down there below deck trying to get out. So I went back out of the out of the gun port, walked aft to my abandoned ship station. And when I got there, this was right under the starboard crane, when I got there, they had passed the word to abandon ship. I didn't hear it come over the speakers, but everybody was hollering, abandon ship, abandon ship. So at that time, the ship seemed to me like it had stabilized at about maybe 35 degrees. It was just sitting there. It sat that way, my way of thinking, for a long time. It probably wasn't too long. But while I was standing there, all the lines between the Oklahoma and the Maryland, we had them 10-inch hawsers and a wire bow and stern, and they were just rum taut. And in my mind, to this day, I would think that I was going to think the ship was laying, it would have hit the bottom, and it would have settled. But I heard on the Maryland about this time, cut the lines. And I looked over here, and at each line on the Maryland, somebody had an axe. And somebody hollered 1, 2, 3. And when they hollered 3, they come down with the axe, and the lines just went. And just this, as they was going up in the air, I thought one of them was going to hit me. It was a forward line, but it was coming this way. And just about the time that they cut the lines, there was another explosion, 2 explosions. There was either explosions or, I thought, in my mind, I thought either the boilers exploded or we got some more hits and torpedoes. I didn't know. But then the ship started to roll over right fast. And when they let them lines go, the ship right on over. And I jumped over the lifeline, I walked right over, and I got on the blister ledge in the area right at the break of the deck from the old one deck to the main deck. And there were people trying to get out of the porthole. the ship at that portholes were normally this way, but that time the portholes was almost straight up in the air. And I helped a few people pull out of the porthole. There was one man tried to get out, and he wouldn't get out. So there was another guy standing there. He says, "You better jump over the side." I says, I'm not going to jump over the side, all them men in the water. I thought somebody pulled me over. So I walked forward. Well, they say the ship was going to sink, you know, below what it was, below that part of the ship that I was on. I said, the ship is never going to sink all the way down. There's going to be part of this ship. I told the people, if you can't swim, stay on the ship. The ship is not going to go under the water. You'll always have some part of the ship above the water. So I walked forward, well, on the side of the ship, but the ship was laying like this now, sideways. Matter of fact, it was a little bit more than sideways.
Was the mast still above? Or
No,
mast
the
down?
mast was, we had already hit bottom when I got off the ship. I walked to the blister ledge, and all of these people, I was a good swimmer in them days, and I thought, well, instead of going to water between us and Maryland, I was going to swim over to the Navy Yard, which is probably, about a mile, half a mile. Good part, a mile probably. But then the Navy, where I was sitting here, and then the landings were there, and then there was supply thing. I changed my mind. Instead of going to the Navy Yard, I was going to go over to supply docks. Halfway over, there was a plane, one of the old SOCs with a pontoon out of the water. The plane was upside down in the water. There was a man sitting on it, so I thought, well, hell, that's a good place for me to sit too and watch what's going on. Well, at this time, the oil was coming out of the Okie. I mean, it was seeping. Well, it was about halfway between me and the plane. And then there was an Arizona boat loaded with sailors going back to the ship. And just shortly after they passed us, passed me and this guy that was sitting on the plane, there was a Jap plane come down and start strafing. So I jumped in the water. So did the other guy. I don't know who the other guy was. He wasn't familiar with me. So when I come up out of the water, I guess usually when I swam, a lot of times I had my eyes open, and I got oil in my eyes and I couldn't see. I lost all sense of direction. So I just kept swimming. And pretty soon I bumped into something, and somebody hollered, "Take that line." So I tried to take the line, and it was slick, you know. My hands were slick, and I couldn't. I said, "Well, hold on, I'll put it under my arms. You can pull me up." I didn't know where it was. I knew I was on some ship. So what I did, I swam back around the bow of the Oklahoma, and I bumped into the Maryland. That's So I got back aboard, and when I got up there, I was sort of staggering around. The guy asked me, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, I can't see." So he took me by the arms, and we went. We was up on the old one deck on Maryland, went down a ladder, and I guess they had farmers' mates or somebody down there. And I guess I'd swallowed oil too. Anyway, they put something in my eyes, and things pretty clear up, started to clear up. They washed my eyes out, and they had another thing. They had this big tub full of raw eggs, and they had a big cup. And they says, "Here, fill that cup up with these eggs, and drink them eggs." Well, I could never drink a raw egg. But as soon as I drank that cup of raw eggs, why, he heaved, you know. And he says, "Have another cup." I said, "Get away here. I'm not going to want nothing to do with you people." So I went back up the ladder. It was right below the ladder on the main deck aft. Went back up the ladder and started to walk forward. And I walked forward, and some guy says, "Would you mind helping them cut down the awning?" That's on the forecastle on the Maryland. I said, "Sure, I'll cut down the awning." He handed me this big butcher knife. It was myself and another guy. We was cutting them ties, what the awning was tied to. Got up the forecastle. There was some people on the starboard side doing the same thing. We met right at the bow. And the one man that we met was Frisky O'Donnell, and he used to be one of my deckhands on the gig, but he was transferred to Maryland about 6 months or a year before. So all Frisky says, "Isn't this a hell of a mess?" I said, "Sure is." I says, "Okay, Frisky." I says, "I guess I'm going to be on this ship just like you." I says, I'll cut they had a tripod right between the anchor chains that held the center of the awning up. I says, I'll cut it off up here, and these other two men can start rolling up the awning. Well, he had said the ship was wanting to get underway, try to get underway. So these three men, I went up the awning, and I cut up all the ties except one, and that damn butcher knife I had was getting dull about this time. I was trying to saw it off and come in. And they passed the word on to Maryland that everybody to seek cover. We were having another air attack. So this tripod is maybe 10 foot above the deck. And that awning was still up there, and I just slid down the awning. I figured, well, if they're going to have an air attack, I'm going to get under the barbette of that turret. At least I got 14, 16 inches of metal between me and them bombs. But I got about, I'd say, 20 feet from underneath the barbette, and a bomb hit right on Maryland, right where that tripod was. And Frisky and there was these other three guys on there, and I says, Frisky, I says, I'm not staying on this damn ship. I says, that's worse than the Oklahoma. About that time, the smoke and stuff coming out of there. I went aft. I run aft on Maryland. I says, I'm going to Fort Island, which was not too far. It was right next to Fort Island. So I walked across the boat boom, after boat boom. There was a 50-foot motor launch there, and there was two men in the motor launch and an officer. And I walked down there, and I was going to jump over from the boat. The water was maybe 50 feet to Fort Island. And this officer says, where are you going? I says, I'm going to get on that land. I says, one ship is enough to sink on me, and I'm not going to have another one sink on me. He says, oh no, he says, you know how to start this boat? And I said, yeah. I says, press this button until that little red light turns on, and press this other button, it'll start right up. I guess they've been trying to start that motor for a while. So he told me, he says, you must know something about boats. And I said, yeah, I know a little bit. And he says, okay, you run this boat then. So this is what I did. I was picking up people from then. I don't know what time it was. But anyway, it was 11:35 when I got off that boat. We'd pick up a boatload of people that was in the water. Some of them dead, some of them half dead, some of them burnt to pieces. And you'd pick them up and heave and pick them up and heave. Finally, I said, I had enough. The last trip I made, we only had 2 or 3 people, and they were dead. And burnt. It was burnt. Oh, the second last trip we made, somebody gave me a handy bill, a pump. The bay was sort of on fire. Then we put this handy bill and we push the flames back with the water. But I said, that was enough. I told this officer out this landing, we'd take some people to hospital landing and some to Fort Island. They had a landing at Fort Island. And that's where I dropped the boat. I said, there's nobody else out there. If there are, they're dead. And I don't want to go back out there. So I just walked away. And I walked maybe 100 feet off the landing, and somebody was hollering, is there a boatswain around? So I probably shouldn't have said something. I said, I'm the boatswain. And he says, we're looking for somebody to go to Westlock. We've got 100 men. And he says that we want a boatswain to take these men in charge for working party over load ammunition and unload ammunition. And I says, I'll do that. That's away from all these ships. So I went over there for 2 weeks. And when I was over there, we were over there till, about 2 weeks. It was shortly before Christmas, and there was XO off the Oklahoma came over there, and he was by himself. And his name was Kenworthy. And it was right at noontime when he came over, and all our men, my men I had over there, was resting. It was the first day that I give them an hour off. Normally we worked over there from 4 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night, slept a few hours and went back to work. That's the way I had them work. And I says, no sir, Commander, I says that these men got a rest. The last 10, 15 days they've been working hard. He says, you heard me. He says, get them up and go to work. And I knew Kenworthy. And I says, Commander, I says, I've been in here charged since the 7th of December, and nobody else has bothered me before. He says, we're going to shoot you at sunrise for a direct disobedience in orders. That's the way, direct disobedience in wartime. We're going to shoot you at sunrise. And there was a couple of Marines that were stationed there that were at the dock, and he called one of them Marines over and he says, now you guard this guy until tomorrow morning. So he left. So there was a boat came in about an hour later, and I wrote this note and sent it to commanding officer naval bases there. And I wrote this note, told him that there's this I didn't mention him by name. All I said, there's a commander came over here and he wants to shoot me at sunrise, and I signed my name. Well, it wasn't. About 2 hours later, there was an admiral and a captain.
Hello? Yeah. Okay, hold on. Okay. I'll stop this.
Well, anyway, there was an admiral and a captain and 2 lieutenants came over in a boat, and they wanted to know who that man was that was going to get shot at sunrise. And I was standing there by the boat, one of the boats that was going to transfer ammunition. I says, that's me. He says, what's your name? I said, my name's Holtel. And he looked at it and he said, yeah, that's the man we're looking for. He says, you're not going to get shot at sunrise. So he asked me who this was that told me. I says, it was this commander. He says, do you know his name? I says, yes, sir, his name's Kenworthy. Oh, that was the exec off the Oklahoma. Then he asked me how come I knew his name. I says, I was off the Oklahoma too. So they says, don't worry about it. We'll take care of everything. So this admiral talked to me for a while, and he asked me what we were doing over there and how everything was going. I says, everything's fine. That's just the only thing that we're missing is soap and toothbrushes and clothes. So the next morning, there was a lieutenant came over, and he got in contact with me. He says, Holtel, he says, we want you to go report up to the commanding officer of naval bases. I think it was at the receiving station. So I went up there, and he asked me what ship I was off of it, and what I did over at Westlock. And I told him what I was doing, loading and unloading ammunition, taking off the practice ammunition, put on shooting ammunition the last 10 days or so. And he dismissed me, and he says, well, he says, you want to go back on a ship? And I says, I sure do. And the next day they give me about 20 men or 30 men to take over to the Louisville. Well, maybe that was a day or so before Christmas or a day or so after Christmas, I don't remember. So then I went aboard to Louisville.
Could you see the Oklahoma from Fort Island when you got on there?
When I got on Fort Island? Oh yeah, you could see Fort Island. Yeah, you could from the landing where I was taking them in. See
when you saw the upturned hull, what was your reaction?
Well, I got off of it when it was upturned. The hull was up, it was belly up.
When you got on landing, you could see it.
Oh yes, when it see, like the Okie was here, and here in Fort Island, see, we was picking up men all along here, the outside of the Battleship Road. We'd take them, the boat where we was dumping them off was either at this landing at Fort Island, or there was a Hospital Point landing, which is over here by the Navy Yard. Oh yeah, I made probably 8 or 10 trips that morning in that motor launch picking up people.
Were they cutting men out of the Oklahoma at that time?
No. As far as I know, at that time they weren't cutting any men off the Oklahoma. There were people on the Oklahoma even when I was picking the people up, especially after the fire died down. See, after the Arizona blew, there was a lot of fire all over the place, even in the water. As far as the fire was, even as far as back to the stern of the Maryland and where the Oklahoma used to be, the fire was just coming up this way.
What were you thinking when the ship was turning over?
what I thought. I said, boy, what a mess. Well, what I thought mostly from the time I went out of that casemate is wonder how many of my boys or how many of my men were killed under below the third deck. I thought, my God, did I send them down there? To this day, I don't know if anyone got out. I mean, any one of that crew got out.
Well, my day started out as a very fine day. The gig wasn't operating properly. Al had turned over an engine that only hit on about four to six cylinders.
You didn't have Mackie.
That's true. And we made it to finally made it to the officers' club landing and dropped off the skipper and came back to the ship and tied up. And we were on the casemate that having our usual beans and cornbread, and we were eating when we heard the word passed upon deck that this is no drill, this is no ship. And of course, the word that we received was battle stations first, but then shortly thereafter, it was report to the third deck, which all unoccupied personnel went. That's where we went, the third deck. And when they passed the word to go to the third deck, why, naturally we all went down, and as Al said, they fastened the hatches down behind us, and that's where we stayed. And when he gave the description of the firing of the 3 torpedoes, we were on third deck, and we watched the side of the ship cave in from the explosion of the torpedoes, and we knew the water was there and everything. So our main thing was self-preservation. We were going to get off.
How far were you from the bulkheads?
We didn't go over to the water side of the outboard side of the. We were on the inboard side, because if we got hit, we knew that we were more protected over there than we would over next to the skin of the ship, because it was exposed. Yeah.
Were there many people over there on that side?
Over with me, there was about I guess 75 to 100 people over there.
What about on
because I'll tie in where Al was talking there about when we started coming up through the hatches are only single ones, and only one body can come through at a time. And as you see, he's seen the necessity for opening up the whole hatch, so we kept the people down until we could open up the whole hatch. Otherwise, the people would never got out of there in time. And at the time I was going over the side, we were reaching down in the casemate, pulling one guy up because the deck was slanting so, until we got everybody up, and then the last man was pulled up over the side, because the ship had keeled over at an angle that you could walk down. Now, as we was coming down the side of the ship, the Arizona blew up. And the only thing we could think of at the time with the people that are around me was that another ship had gone, and right at the moment we were safe. And as Al pointed out, the cables or the rope were tight, and they were starting to cut loose at the time, the ropes between the ship. I went off on the bow of the ship and was swimming to the gig, because the gig was tied there, and I wanted to get to the gig. But in the meantime, they had strafed it, and there were so many holes in it that it wasn't a gig any longer. And that was at a time that I found a Smoky Struthers that first class had mentioned couldn't swim. And I thought he could swim because he was a full-blooded Wahine. And of course my instinct was to help old Smoky, because I had sort of been he had been my godfather on board ship. And so we got him headed towards the beach, and then an officer came along. He couldn't swim either, an ensign, I don't know his name at that time, and we got him put up on the hands upon the gig. And I went on and swam on into the beach, and because all I had on was a pair of skivvies, and I had no shoes, no nothing. and went up and was knocking on doors trying to find clothes. And the wives of the chiefs that lived on the island were handing us dungarees and shirts and things like that, so we could at least put something on. And as it progressed along there, I went back to the landing, and they wanted somebody to go out to the West Lock to pick up ammunition, because they was planning on spending the night there, and they wanted ammunition guns. So I took one of the boats and crew and went out to West Lock. When we got out to West Lock, there was an ammunition ship in there, and we had to go up to the ammunition ship, and they hadn't bombed it yet. I don't think they even knew it was there.
No, they didn't bomb that.
So we was lucky, but it scared the living daylights out of us, because you know what an ammunition ship is. And we got our ammunition, and we went back to Fort Island and unloaded, and got the Okie crew, what was left of it, equipped it for the night. Now, that night, of course, we had quite a few misadventures, because we was up on the buildings that were still standing, and you probably heard stories of when planes come in, we shot at them, which we did. And then the next morning, when daylight come, they had a working party that put aboard the Okie. At that time, we started tapping, and I worked on the Okie for 3 days tapping. And our first people we got out of, my recollection, was from the after steerage, because that was the place where they could make it back that had enough air to accumulate them. And the first thing they was going to do, they was going to cut through with torches, but the torches would have created a big bomb, so they had to call in the chippers and start chipping. And we had plans upon deck to find out where these various areas was, because when you heard tapping after you tapped, why then is we progressed down the hull of the ship. We always kept it marked so that we know where we were going from the tapping. And we worked out, I worked it on 3 days until the tapping actually stopped. And in the meantime, I don't remember how many men we got out, but I know we got out quite a few. And I know the first 30 that got out of the stern steerage, they was tickled to get out of there. And I went from there. I was sent out to the unit where all the ships were gathering with their people, and I was transferred to the Chester at that time. That completed my
When you were on did you volunteer to go back to the Oklahoma and tap on the hull?
Yes. Yes, I did.
You know, what type of tapping did you hear come out?
Oh, we had chipping hammers.
Yeah, chipping hammers.
Had chipping hammers.
Okay.
And you had to keep us apart because of the listening and tapping. When we first started out, you could tap on the hull, and you could hear the tapping coming from down below. But as I say, as time progressed, why it was getting weaker and weaker. My concern was I had 2 brother-in-laws that were still on there, and I wanted to see what we could do, because I knew if I went home without trying to do something, I'd probably never live it down.
How did they actually cut into the hull?
We would scratch off the paint, and then we'd tap. We'd give 3 taps, and then wait. Then tap 3 taps more, and wait. And if we got a response from below, why then they'd mark that on the plans, and they'd start chipping.
Yeah, what do you mean by chip? What is...
A chipper is a person that has a big air hammer, and he has tools that will cut through metal. And when you cut through the metal, you can imagine a 3/4 inch sheet of metal that you have to cut through, and you cut a chip out of it. And they cut out a piece big enough for a man to go down through, and to particularly try to find these people.
Actually, how much below that 3/4 sheet of metal, what is under that?
Well, usually the oil. and you had to, when you had to go through there, well, then you had to go down and chip out some more. In order to get into these passageways in various areas that they were in, especially in storerooms, ammunition rooms, and storage was the easiest one to get into because it was wide open.
And how long did it take to get those men out of the steering aft?
Well, steering, the first day we got them out, but the others was slow progress for the rating. Now, I forget what the man's name DeLong. I don't remember when we got him out.
Okay, he was steering aft.
Yes.
Yeah. What was your reaction when you saw the men coming out of the hull? What were you thinking?
Well, it was sort of a sigh of relief because the more we got out, that meant the less people that had died. And of course, as Al had mentioned before, the harbor was sickening because I had seen people during the day, the previous day, that there was nothing wrong with them, but they were froze. I mean, you can wave your hands in front of their eyes, and they weren't even human beings at the time because they just actually had froze, either at their stations or later on when the shock set in on them. And for those that were moving, they were trying to pull things together and get things moving because at that time they had passed the word. They didn't know whether the Japanese were going to hit the beach or not. And that was their biggest concern then because that was a crucial point. Because if they'd had troop ships behind them, why, I imagine they could have overrun us. They got a hell of a fight, but they probably would have overrun us.
Do you think the government knew the attack was coming?
I'm not quite sure. We had a lot of talk of that, but we were well aware that the Japanese would attack because we was always standing watches at all times. Most of us had to stand watch on a machine gun, which had no ammunition, but we could get it from the OD in case of necessity.
How many crew members of the Oklahoma went up and helped tap on the hull?
I don't remember how many. Oh, you mean we're tapping on the hull?
Yeah.
There was about 10 of us that I know of that were on there.
And how long did you tap until there's no more?
Well, we just tapped until there was no more. Because once you started chipping, well, you had to slack down the tapping. Although some of us, we'd go back to another section of the ship away from the tapping, away from the chipping, and see if we could get any answer.
How much of the hull was above water?
We worked that whole hull because there was always ways of getting out down below.
Oh, I would say there was at least 300 feet of the hull from the stern up. Actually, the ship was sort of built sort of like this, and it was this belly part that was sticking out of the water. And I knew that, as I told you before, I knew that the water was probably only about 50 or 60 feet deep. And when the ship went over, there was going to be some part of that ship sticking out of the water.
Did the mast actually break off or hit the water, or did it go on down?
That didn't break off when I seen it. It was going down in the water when I seen it. And it probably broke or bent when it hit the mud. I don't know. I don't know. But when I was sitting on the plane out there in the bay, it was just like it was when I left. It was the one bottom of the big bulge was up in the air.
There's a photograph I've seen of the California during the attack, and all you see is just the tip of the Oklahoma out of the water.
Well,
But it
you
looked
should
like
have
more of
seen
it.
you should have
Yeah.
seen the screw and
Yeah, this one screw was out of the
one
water.
screw out of the water and
That
the rest of the hull, yeah. Because she was like a big pot-bellied whale.
Yeah. They take that screw off the ship?
Oh yeah, they took this screw off the ship.
What happened to that screw?
I think that, if I'm not mistaken, that screw's over pretty close to Arizona Memorial, if I remember right. It was there at one time.
Whenever anyone mentions the Oklahoma, what do you all think of?
I lost a good home.
What was that?
Whenever anyone mentions the Oklahoma, what do you think of?
Well, I would say I lost a good home, plus I think more of the Oklahoma after the Oklahoma went down, and when I was, even to me, a lot of times when people talk about the Oklahoma, all I can do is smell burnt bodies and oil. That comes to me real vivid to this day. Well, not so much in the last 8 or 10 years, but sometimes, you know, I'll smell oil fumes, and that makes me think of the people I were pulling out of the water.
When I relieved Al as coxswain of the gig, I wrote a letter to my wife. I says, I found my job that I'm going to spend 20 years on. And they spoiled it in December. And as far as Pearl Harbor is concerned, I completely put that out of my mind. I mean, I have my thoughts go back to my brother-in-laws that were lost on there. I go back
And
to
they didn't get off?
No, they didn't get off. And when they did get the ship turned up, they had to go through and put them all in a mass grave. And it's up on Punch Bowl now, just their names up there. I often think about the good times that we had together, and as far as Pearl Harbor is concerned, I think it was better to put it behind. I can remember the smell and the stench and all of that, and I carried that all through World War II. Because I almost lost another ship, the Chester. She was torpedoed, and you could still feel things, because we went through the same things that we went on the Oklahoma, as we tied down the screws and different things. We backed down for 3 days because we couldn't go forward, and just to save the ship.
Anything else about the Oklahoma you can think of you want to talk about or discuss?
Well, not too much. As I say, I had a brother on there too, and thank God he got off. But after he left the OP, he went to San Francisco. But he was in the 5th Division too. It wasn't my fault that he got in the 5th Division. It was that my OD would stand OD when he come aboard. And I told the captain, well, I knew he was coming. I didn't know he was in boot camp, which was real funny until the captain told me. He told me he had a letter from the commanding officer, Great Lake Training Station, that I had a brother in the Navy. He says, you know that? And I said, no, sir. He says he wants to come aboard ship. He says when he comes aboard ship, he says he's already coming aboard ship. Do you want him in the same division? I said, no, sir. But I didn't think it would go so good, but as I was first class at the time, first class boatswain mate, and I didn't think it was too good for a seaman second to be under me, my own brother. So it happened when he came aboard, I was taking the captain someplace, and when I came back, the OD told me he wanted to talk to me, and he says, you got a new man in the 5th Division. And I said, who's that? And he says, your brother. I said, my God.
Was Louis Copeland on the Louisville with you?
Yes.
And
He was on the Oklahoma with me, then he went to Westlock with me, and then he went to Louisville with me. It's funny, he was in the 5th Division on there, and then when he went to Louisville, he was in my division on Louisville.
so what did Louisville do after that?
Well, we went from Pearl, we went to Mare Island, or San Francisco, took off all our practice ammunition, took on other ammunition, and we went back out in the South Pacific, went around Gilbert Islands. We was in that Gilbert Island raid, and we was up around Guadalcanal, down around New Guinea, and
Yeah, we were in the same task force, weren't we? I know we were junior ship.
well, We
Well,
we were on quite a few battles. A couple of battles around Battle of Sable, 2 battles in Sable. We lost a lot of ships one night. Matter of fact, about 12 or 13 destroyers and I think 7 cruisers. The Japs caught hell too.
Well, I think we have a good interview.
Thank you.
It's almost 2 hours.
Oh, 2 hours.
We're about an hour and
Well,
45 minutes.
I told you I had a long story to tell. I never did have to tell anybody that. Well, I've told a few people, but not too many. I never.
I'd even forgot he had a brother of ours.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I need to get your autograph.